Do 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 do. Bum bum bum. Bum 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 bum. Hey everybody. Do you have your delicious cup of coffee? I sure hope you do. Come on in here. All right, it's time for the simultaneous sip. You know, a few days ago, I was actually thinking to myself, man, things got boring. Nothing's happening. And then I wake up yesterday morning and I see a text from somebody saying, what do you think of that about Kanye? And I thought to myself at 5:30 in the morning or whenever I was waking up, why would I be thinking about Kanye right now at 5:30 in the morning? And then I checked my Twitter feed and I saw that Kanye West had retweeted my video in which I was talking about him and Candace Owens at 9 separate times with 9 different clips out of it, which of course made the world blow up because, it looked like worlds were colliding and, dogs were marrying cats and, it was raining and on fire at the same time. And, it was daytime and night simultaneously. And people didn't seem to be happy about the fact, think about what made people angry. And I hate to put it in these terms, but when I do, you're going to see that this is exactly what happened. There were lots of noise and lots of complaints, but it really came down to this. The reason people were really unhappy is that that Kanye West and I would just agree on something. And it feels racial. Well, I don't know if it is, but it just feels racial. That the fact that we would both have just a reasonable, well-explained reason for believing that the past should not influence our decisions so much in the present, perfectly reasonable thing to think. But somehow it's not okay if Kanye has that very ordinary thought at the same time that I do, or at the same time. Somehow the world is not okay with that. So as I predicted, the long knives would come out for me, and that the fake news stories would be rampant. So I was right, of course. So the internet is now full of stories about me which are largely false. You may have seen that I think BuzzFeed was calling me far-right men's rights advocate. As you know, neither of those are true, both fake news. I think Mediate did, Spin did, L.com. I think there were the AV Club, probably about several other publications came after me. And I don't know if they just Googled the other publications, whoever went first, but they all had the same bad set of stories. So one of them, this guy Caleb Akarma at Mediate, I think, who Dave Rubin refers to as, quote, an embarrassment to journalism. I love Dave. and he definitely captured it right. So Caleb Akarma, whose forever name is Embarrassment to Journalism, or ETJ, we could just call him ETJ for now, Embarrassment to Journalism. He printed several specific criticisms of me. And he challenged me on Twitter to deny that any of these were true. Now, Twitter is not a really good platform for a long conversation. So I just said that I would take it to Periscope, or as I like to call it, the home field advantage. So that when I talk about it, there's nobody interrupting me and I can give you the full explanation. So I'm going to give you the full list of complaints about me that are alleged to be true from Caleb Akarma at Mediate, who Dave Rubin quite correctly calls an embarrassment to journalism. Now, you can decide yourself if he's an embarrassment to journalism by seeing my response to his criticisms. When I'm done, you'll either say, my God, Scott, he certainly is right. You're an embarrassment to Periscope. Or, I think you might, say ETAG J is an embarrassment to journalism. Here's the number one thing which he says as a criticism to me. Number one, regularly appeared on the conspiracy site Infowars. Technically correct. I have appeared on Infowars several times. Also technically correct, but left out, is that my stated policy is to go on any platform. So I've been on CNN a number of times. I've been on MSNBC. I've been on pretty much every liberal platform. I was booked on one this morning. This morning I was supposed to be on Yahoo News, but they had a scheduling problem. So is it true that I've regularly appeared on the conspiracy site Infowars? Now, conspiracy site is his word. I'm not going to argue whether that's correct, but I have appeared on Infowars. If you only knew that, it would sound like, well, there's proof he's a far-right guy. But if you knew what I say publicly fairly often, and I demonstrate as obviously as possible that I appear on any major platform, why? Why would I appear on Infowars unless I agree with every single thing they've ever said? Here's why. And I know this is not obvious to Kala Bikarma because he's an embarrassment to journalism, but here's why I would appear on their platform. They invite me on Infowars to give my opinion to their followers and to them, right? Infowars does not invite me on the show to tell me what they're thinking. They bring me on to tell them what I'm thinking. And to the extent that you think I'm a good influence, even if you thought Infowars was a horrible, blight on humanity, wouldn't you want them to be subject to better influences, such as myself, who describes himself as far left? All right. So does Infowars have other people on the show who describe themselves as far left? Maybe. I don't know. They might. But that would be exactly what you'd want to see. Wouldn't Caleb want to see people from another opinion on Infowars? All right, and let me clarify. When I say that I'm left of Bernie, here's what I mean by that. I would like to see universal health care. I think we can't be a great country without it. I'd like to see free education and training for a lifetime, but I don't think we can get there through taxes. So where I differ from Bernie and socialists is I don't want to take it from the rich. I don't want to tax. I think technology and better management and being smarter can get us to those places, even if it takes a while. So those would be two examples where I'm far left of Bernie, but without the impractical stuff. Now, some of you are saying libertarian, but it is certainly not libertarian to have the government helping us get to universal health care and free education and training. All right, but that's another topic. Just telling you where I stand on the spectrum. Number two from Caleb and Karma, the embarrassment to journalism, is defended Holocaust deniers. So he's saying, this is very clear criticism. He's saying that I defended Holocaust deniers. Never. Not once. Nothing slightly like that. Never. Here's an actual journalist in public saying that I personally have, quote, defended Holocaust deniers. I've never done anything like that. Now, the article that he's referring to, I say in clear language, no serious person denies the Holocaust. Can't get more clear than that. Now, in that same article, I talk about, this was before I was using the word persuasion in a lot of my blogging, but this was related to the topic before I had sort of branded it that way. And what I was questioning was one very narrow thing, which is how exact is the count of the number of people who died in the Holocaust. And the point of it was, we act like it's exact, but what are the odds that something that would be that hard to measure, you'd have a really good number for? But it doesn't really matter, does it? When we talk about World War II itself, people say, we don't know how many people died in World War II. It might be somewhere between like 50 and 60 million, maybe, somewhere in that. But knowing that it's somewhere in that range doesn't make anybody a World War II denier, because they don't know the exact number. Somebody's saying, please stop. Because I think you know that it's impossible to talk about this topic without sounding like a Holocaust denier. But I'll say as clearly as possible, I'm not one. Would not support anybody who was one. It's clearly, a fact. And, but it is also a fact that when you see a large organization or group trying to get an exact count of something that is that hard to count, it's probably an approximation, which doesn't change anything. All right, number 3, my critic says that I believe the Seth Rich conspiracy. Well, that's a vague statement, because what is the conspiracy? Is it a conspiracy? Well, let me tell you what I do believe, so just to be clear on this. So if you're talking about the Seth Rich conspiracy, you're talking about everything from he took the data, gave it to WikiLeaks, and then Hillary Clinton put a hit on him and had him murdered. I do not believe Hillary Clinton put a hit on Seth Rich. All right, I haven't seen any evidence of that. I do believe, here's the part I do believe, that the two competing stories for what happened, one is sort of the Russia did it, Guccifer, etc., is one set of explanations, and the Seth Rich had a thumb drive and he got the data and gave it to WikiLeaks is another story that's out there. So what I believe is that one of those stories fits the facts which we have been given much better than the other. And the Russia did it story, unfortunately, requires us to believe our intelligence agencies were unbiased and honest and accurate, and they're not really credible at the moment. So the sources that say it was Guccifer and that he did it are, by their nature, they're no longer credible. Now that's different from being wrong. They can be right, but they're not credible, because there are too many things in the news at the moment that would question their credibility. WikiLeaks, however, has a long record of being credible. You could hate them or love them, but at least they've been credible. And Assange has made it very clear. He's hinted in a way that makes it clear he wants you to believe it, that Seth Rich was a source for WikiLeaks. That doesn't make it true. All right? So we can't know what really happened, nor could we ever know. We can only know what other people told us happened, and we have questionable credibility in a lot of cases. So if you compared Assange's clear indication that Seth Rich was a source, and WikiLeaks has a long record of not being wrong, that's one source that supports one story that it was Seth Rich. The other version is that Russia did it, and all the people involved with that are low credibility. So we have two stories. One has tremendously low credibility. One has, so far, A+ credibility. My position on Seth Rich is, at least on just the narrow question of whether he was the source for the data, is that we could talk all day about the other details, but there's just a stronger case for Seth Rich being involved. The murder part, there's no evidence that Hillary was behind the murder. It's just the timing is questionable, but there are a lot of things that would be questionable timing if you looked at them from a distance. So that doesn't mean anything. All right. So where my critic says he believes the Seth Rich conspiracy, that makes it sound like I'm buying all the parts of it. And it also presumes the answer. By calling it a conspiracy, you've dismissed it without regard to the evidence. I could have as easily said, well, Caleb, are you buying the Russia did it conspiracy? So, if you label it a conspiracy in your statement, you're sort of assuming the answer there. All right, number 4, claimed Hillary was, quote, now he's quoting me from maybe a blog post or something, was, quote, likely to trigger a race war and cause the, quote, uptick in domestic racial violence to win the election. Well, I've talked about that at length, and of course that's true, but it's also something I believe he would agree with if he were not dishonest. When Hillary Clinton started describing Trump as a racist, people believed it. And when she took all of the confirmation bias of there's this time he awkwardly said this, there's the dog whistle that I can hear that you can't, there's the time he did something 30 years ago. When she put it all together, she created this ultra scary vision of Trump being a dangerous racist. And it did cause an immense amount of racial unrest. Now, I too have criticized candidate Trump and now President Trump for not handling race relations well. But let's be honest, the challenge for him is much higher than for other people because the quality of the opposition was first rate. I wrote in my book Win Bigly that when the Clinton team started using the word dark, which I believe came from a cognitive scientist who said dark is a great word, it captures all of these bad, racist, dangerous things. When he started doing that, Hillary was intentionally whipping up racial feelings. The natural risk of that is that the bad racial feelings turn into violence, and I think we did see violence. So his criticism is that I made a prediction that is unambiguously true. Would he disagree that there have been more racial tensions lately? The part he would disagree with is that Hillary Clinton was behind them. Now, this is what I call the one variable thinker. Anybody who thinks that there's only one variable behind anything that happens is not really a serious thinker. You need all the variables to happen for anything really important to happen. In this case, the variable was President Trump had to handle race relation stuff not as well as he could. And that happened, right? But the second thing that had to happen is that somebody had to package that as, my God, it's the biggest problem in the world. He's a huge racist. He's going to do terrible things. So Hillary did the heavy lifting of packaging that as a big major problem. What Trump did was make mistakes that allowed that to happen. But if Trump had simply done what Trump did, and the news media, this is an important point, if the news media and the Clinton campaign had simply noted what the president said without comment, in other words, without adding the persuasion to it, the public would say, well, that sounded like a weird way to say that. That bothers me a little bit. I'll think about something else. So what President Trump does in terms of the way he couches, race relations and everything else, the way he speaks about race, all of those things might have bothered us a little bit if other people hadn't told us how bothered we should be. So the part that Caleb doesn't understand is the effectiveness of the criticism. The critics are very effective, and they have created a package that is quite persuasive. You don't get, oh my God, Trump's a huge racist just by what he's doing. You need other people to package it, explain it, and put a bow on it. And without that stuff, you don't get the racial unrest and the violence. And then he said, so here's another pull quote. Before I read this one, let me give you some context. There was a time early in my blogging career when I used to try to intentionally say things that were provocative and would get people really wound up, but I would say them in a way, if I could craft them right, that they would be really wound up about something they agreed with, right? And it's a hard thing to do. So I was trying to say something that people would completely agree with all the parts of it, and even the larger thought, but even while they're agreeing with it, they would get really mad at it, because I thought that would be, frankly, entertaining. But I didn't know that it would haunt me forever, so I'm gonna classify this as a rookie mistake. And here's how it was expressed. Years later, here's how this is expressed. So this is Caleb and Karma again, the embarrassment to journalism, who says, he's quoting me. Well, let me give this to you without the controversial wording and see if you agree with the thoughts. Right? Then I'll tell you how I worded it, and watch how you go from, well, I agreed with everything you just said, to, my God, you're offensive. All right, watch this. Watch how I do this. So here are the things he's quoting. I'll just reword them into a way that I think you'll agree with. Adults do not treat children the way they treat other adults. That's not controversial, is it? The way you are going to treat, let's say, a 6-year-old should be probably different than you would treat an adult. Wouldn't you say that would be true? Okay. So that's the first thing that he's saying is horrible, that an adult would treat a child differently than an adult. The second thing he finds quite horrible, and I'll tell you how these are related. These are separate thoughts, but I'll show you how they're related in a minute. I said that a normal, nice human being would not treat someone who had let's say, a serious mental problem, would not treat them the same as someone who didn't. So if somebody was suffering from a very major mental disability, you would not get in an argument with them, for example, because there's nothing to be gained from that. Now, you would agree with that, right? If you're a nice, regular human being, you're not going to get in an argument with somebody who is mentally incapable, and you know it. There's no debate there at all. Third thing I said is that men will hesitate to argue with women with the same, let's say, the same enthusiasm that they would argue with other men. Now, the thinking behind this is that men typically will argue with each other almost like a sport. So, and you see this on Twitter every day, right? When men are debating men, we see it almost like a sport. And then people will join my team on Twitter and here comes one of my teammates to make a good point. And, we're making a good point over here. And look what that other team is doing. So we tend to see that as a sort of almost a sport. However, when it goes across gender, sometimes it changes. So my statement, which became the controversial part, is that men will hesitate to get in the same kind of an argument about anything substantive with women because the penalty is higher. So here's the controversial statement, that men, on average, believe that the penalty for arguing with a woman about anything important is higher than the penalty for arguing with another man. Now, probably all men would agree with that. It would be hard to find a man who would disagree with that. There's always somebody who will disagree with anything. But as a generality, right? Now, lots of people will say, well, we shouldn't be like that, or I know somebody who isn't, or, I'm not like that, or I try not to be like that. That's all true. I'm talking generalities. As a generality, men will pull their punches. That's a terrible phrase. Let me mentally erase pull their punches, because I don't want to make this sound like physical abuse, because that's not the topic. Men, when they're arguing with women, will hold back. And if you talk to men and just ask them, they will agree. But the trick is, it probably has to be a man asking another man, because if a woman asks a man if he holds back when arguing with a woman, do you know what he's going to say? Whatever you want. He's probably not going to give an honest answer. So those are three things I said, which I believe everyone would agree with. You don't talk to a child the way you talk to an adult. You don't deal with someone who has a severe mental handicap the way you would deal with somebody else. And men are hesitant to argue with full force against women because there's a bigger penalty they feel. Now, those things you don't disagree with, but so remember the background here was I tried to say things back then because I thought it was entertaining, maybe just for me, to say things that people would agree with, but say it in a way that would make them angry at it at the same time. So now I'm going to take those three things you just agreed with, and I'm going to put it in the offensive form. So here's the offensive form. I took those three things I just said, how men treat children, mentally handicapped, and women, and then I provocatively put them in the same sentence to make everybody angry. And I said, women are treated differently by society for exactly the same reason that children and the mentally handicapped are treated differently. It's just easier this way for everyone. Now think about how offensive that is. Now, people take offensiveness and they say, okay, if you're offensive, then you're also a misogynist, you're also a bigot. Those are really different things. I'm definitely offensive. But in this case, I was offensive intentionally, and I thought it was obvious why. All right? When I wrote it, I thought, okay, everybody's going to know that I'm putting these three things that don't belong together in the same sentence, because when you read it, it's going to be really offensive. But you won't disagree with any of it. And you didn't, right? Because I just went through it. You agreed with all the points. It's just that when you put it together, it slightly makes you think that, somehow I've conflated children and handicapped people and women, even though I clearly didn't. All right, so this was Caleb's other point. So his question was, how do you possibly defend these things? And of course, that's what I just did. Now, having heard these, let's run through the list for those of you who were nice enough to stay for the whole thing. Is number one, I regularly appear on Infowars. True, but out of context. I regularly appear on all the shows, CNN, etc., because I like talking to audiences, especially that don't agree with me. So the first one is fake news by leaving out the context. Second one, defended Holocaust deniers, just 100% false. So that one's just fake news. So the first two are just fake news. Believes in the Seth Rich conspiracy, not true, because the Seth Rich conspiracy implies, I think, a clear implication all the way from Hillary Clinton order to hit, etc., whereas I have a nuanced feeling that I don't know anything about what Hillary may or may not have done. There's no evidence I've seen that would suggest she ordered a hit, but there are two competing thoughts. Anyway, I already talked about that. So that one is fake news by making it bigger than actually what I do believe. 4, claimed Hillary was likely to trigger a race war and cause an uptick in domestic racial violence. We all witnessed that. So that was a correct prediction. I don't even know why it's on the list of criticisms when it's objectively, clearly true. And then the last one I just went through, where I was intentionally being offensive because I thought people would realize it was supposed to be funny. But here's the funny part. The thing that offended people about my statement that men hold back when they argue with women is that I said the pushback would be too violent. There would be too much of a cost to argue with women. And what happened when I said that? There was too much of a cost. So in pushing back, Caleb just made my point. My point is you can't talk about this sort of thing without getting in too much trouble. Do you know what would have happened if I had said this sort of thing about men? See, my point was that you can argue with men with low risk, but arguing with women is a higher risk. Do you know what would have happened if I'd said the same offensive things about men? Well, you don't have to wonder, because the same blog post had offensive things about men in it. Why didn't he pull those out? It was actually an offensive post about men. That was the main context of the post. He pulled out the one thing that was offensive to someone else. So anyway, he proved my point. So I hope this is not too self-serving. I called my shots ahead of this. I told you yesterday early that people would be coming after me with lots of made-up stories, and that they would be remarkable, and they might even sound real when you heard them. Don't you think that anybody who read these points out of context without my explanation, don't you think they would believe them? Well, you don't have to wonder about it, because every major publication except Billboard, I think Billboard is the only one who got the facts right. But that would make something like 7 out of 8 major publications got everything about me wrong. They called me a men's rights activist because I once made fun of men's rights activists. That's it. I once made fun of them, and so therefore I am one. And they call me far right when I'm closer to far left. So if you're wondering how prevalent is fake news, look no further than this example where you just saw a whole page of it. Just about me, right in front of you, and I told you it was going to happen, and then it happened, and it's pretty easy to demonstrate that it's fake. They are afraid of you, Scott. Well, are they afraid of me? This latest blow up, I don't think was about me. Here's what I think it was. I think it was about Kanye, and I think it was about people telling him he couldn't leave his bucket. Now, the problem with telling Kanye he can't leave his thought bucket is that his entire message is, hey, you people, you're stuck in a thought bucket. So every time they criticize Kanye for for leaving his thought bucket, they're validating his entire point, and they're bringing him one step closer to the presidency, whether they like it or not. Let me give you some persuasion advice. It's become very popular for people on the right to say that the Democrats are doing some kind of, what do they call it? I think there are a few phrases they use, but keeping the black voters on the Democratic plantation or something. So there's a couple different ways they say it, but they're both allusions to slavery. I find those, the plantation, I would abandon that. As a phrase that you want to use, if you're trying to be persuasive, I think it's working against you. Here's what you don't want to say if the other side already thinks you're a bunch of racists. Plantation. All right. If you believe that people are rational, then your analogy about how it's, sort of analogous to slavery, but it's a slavery of the mind, I get the concept. And so the analogy is not that bad, but here's the problem. People are not smart. They don't follow logic exactly. We're not a logical species, all of us, not just other people, all of us. We're not rational. So we don't follow that concept very well. We get it, but it's not persuasive. Analogies, have I ever told you that analogies are not persuasive? All right. But association is persuasive. And people didn't like the association of, Kanye agreeing with Candace Owens, agreeing with, conservatives, etc. It was an association problem. So when the people on the right say, hey, you Democrats, you're trying to keep African Americans on the plantation, what you've really done is the people on the right who use those words like plantation have associated themselves with slavery. So they've worsened their own reputation, and they have not influenced the other side, right? So every time somebody on the right uses that analogy of, on the plantation, slavery, you are making things not just a little worse, a lot worse. In terms of persuasion mistakes, that would be close to a 10, 10 out of 10. Yeah. So you want to leave that language behind. Look at the language that Kanye uses, for a good example. Breaking out of the mental prison. Even prison made me a little uncomfortable, because there's a racial disparity in prisons, so I didn't like that. But it's so visual, I was willing to put up with it. Somebody said, what about if you are black, can you talk about the plantation? You can, with less risk than if somebody on the right uses the same words. So that's true. I would still not do it because I don't know how many times I'll say this, but it's about the past. We just need to release on that. Release on the analogies, just release on the past. Let's just deal with what we have right now. And what we have right now gives us a set of opportunities and a set of problems. Why can't we deal with them? Why do we even need to talk about the past? Let me tell you the other dumbest thing that the right does. I don't think there's anything that makes me more angry at the people on the right than what I'm going to say right now. And it's not because I disagree with the facts or anything. It's because it's just such a bad way to think about the world. And it's this. Somebody will say, hey, those KKK people are all Trump supporters. You saw the KKK had all of 27 people gathered, and of course it was national news. And part of the news was, Howard Dean said, oh, these are Trump supporters, Trump's base. Now, people on the right like to respond to that by showing the history that the KKK is really a democratic invention. That if you go back far enough in time, the KKK was more Democrats. Now, whether or not that's true, I think it is true, it doesn't frickin' matter. It just doesn't matter. It's just the past. Stop arguing about the past. Because do you know what? If you go back far enough, there was a caveman who hit another caveman on the head with a stick. Doesn't frickin' matter. It's not here. All right? Those Democrats who were in the KKK, all dead. Well, maybe not all of them. Just doesn't matter. It's just the past. All right? If it's true that there are some, KKK here today and marching, well, that matters. It doesn't matter much because there were 27 of them out of a country of 300 million. But you just got to let go of the past. Just got to let go. How do you respond to this lie? It's not a lie. It's literally true that the folks, there are several categories of people who would be called racists. They are more likely to be Republicans. Let me explain the complicated reason why. Some people like immigration toughness for economic reasons. Some of them like it because it lets in fewer brown people. It's not hard to understand that the racists have a preference. Why wouldn't racists have preferences? They were either going to like the Democrats or the Republicans. They were going to like one or the other. It just doesn't matter why they like it. They like it for a different reason. Absurd oversimplification. Yeah. It also doesn't matter that other people agree with you for different reasons. That's not an important fact. If I think the world is round because I learned it in school, and you think the world is round because you figured it out because you sailed a ship and and the horizon disappeared. It doesn't matter how we got to the same place. We can both fly a plane around the world. That was the worst analogy ever. Good example of why you shouldn't use analogies. And immigrants are not just brown, somebody says. That is true. What are all the racist Republicans hiding? I don't understand the question. And by the way, is it my imagination, or did the great alleged racist Republicans look at Kanye West and say, maybe? Is there any racist Republican who doesn't love what Candace Owens is saying? I think Candace and Kanye both put the lie to the racial framing that all Republicans are racist, because look how easy it was. Look how amazingly easy it was for Republicans to embrace the ideas of both of these people without embracing everything that they're about. Nobody said, we love everything that Kanye's done in all of his personal life or whatever. Republicans simply said, I like this idea. I like this thing he said. Why can't you like the good stuff? Let me ask you this. If an African American ran for president on the Republican side, let's say after Trump's second term, if you want to think of it that way, just to make Trump not part of the decision. Let's say it's after his second term. If an African American Republican got into the primaries and got some purchase, is there anybody here, because most of you are conservatives, probably 95% watching this, is there anybody watching this who would not vote for a qualified African American Republican candidate who had normal Republican views? Many of you are, you're anonymous. Is there anybody here who would fail to vote for them because black? Yeah. So, all right. Let me rephrase it so it's easier to answer. Yeah, you're getting confused. What's the yes and what's the no? I think you're all saying the same thing. I think I'm seeing 100% agreement that the Republican Party would absolutely get behind an African American president. I believe that's always been the case. And, I've spent, how many hours have I spent interacting with the base? The most Republican of the Republican, the most conservative of the conservative, more Republican than conservative, if you look at the people I've interacted with. But here's another little mind blower for you. For about 48 hours, Republicans were going crazy talking about Kanye and about Candace. I never heard anybody say a racist remark about either one of them. Did you? And I'm talking about Twitter. I'm talking about, Twitter is the place where all racist remarks go to live. I didn't hear anybody. I didn't hear a single Republican make a derogatory racial remark about either of those people. Why? Because they like their ideas. Boom. End of story. And I think it's kind of, I think it broke some brains. I think it broke some brains that the Republican Party is far more idea-based than race-based. Because I think the people on the left, have learned to see the world through the filter of gender and race. And it's hard for them to imagine that Republicans, at least the majority, not counting the racist minority, but the basic generic Republican is pretty idea based, not race based. Yeah, people from the left were pretty angry that there could be any kind of a meeting of the minds on ideas. That just seemed Tom Arnold, yeah. So you saw some horrible things out of the left, but I don't think I saw one negative thing about Kanye's ideas. There were people who obviously said, "Hey, he's not a serious politician," and I would agree with that. Yet, he's also young. So here's what I'd say about Kanye. If you say he'll never be president because he doesn't have the experience, the background, doesn't know enough about politics or whatever, that's probably all true. If you say he can't acquire that stuff in 8 years, well, you are really wrong. Because in 8 years, he could be the most qualified person in the pack, if he wants to. He would just have to want to and then focus on it. And let me ask you this. Would you say it's true that President Trump's presidency makes Kanye West's presidency more likely? It does, doesn't it? Don't you think the fact that President Trump became president, it makes it far more likely that Kanye would be considered a serious candidate, and that people would say, yeah, he could do a good job. Because you have to see at least one non-politician, get in there and do something that people liked. All right. Ben Shapiro is super skeptical of Kanye. Skepticism is exactly the right position. I try to make it a habit not to disagree with some people, some specific people. Like I try not to disagree with Dershowitz or Ben Shapiro. I'm sure there are a few others. But generally, my first reaction is if I feel like I'm going to disagree, I immediately change my opinion to their opinion, so I sound smarter. So you should be skeptical today that Kanye West could be president, for example. That would be entirely appropriate. You should all be skeptical. But if you think he can't get to that place where he would be a valid candidate and make a difference, I say the evidence suggests otherwise. His mastery of the talent stacks, his mastery of persuasion, his understanding of people, the way he's tapped into the zeitgeist, the way he understands everything from, product design all the way through, music, writing, producing, the promotional part of it, the live events. Every part of what Kanye has mastered is in the world of persuasion. Design is persuasion. The way he packages himself, it's all persuasion. It's not an accident that we're talking about him instead of someone else. That's all persuasion. And that level of talent that is so broad and fits all the right types of persuasion, if you think he can't get there if he wants it, that you should not be skeptical about. He can get there if he wants it. Would he win? Would he make a difference? Would he be a good president? We can't know those things. But certainly he has the capability. Yeah, I need to start doing some podcasts with other people. I should start doing that again. I was waiting for something to happen, and I think it's almost happened. All right. Is there anything else happening that's important? Oh, let's talk about North Korea. I'll give you a bonus North Korea thing. So I have also told you that the most credible voice I hear talking about North Korea is Gordon Chang. So whenever he's got an article or he has an interview, I go to it like a bullet. because everything he says is reasonable and well-informed, or at least it comes off that way to me. Now, what he was saying is that there's a concern, and I don't know what level of risk to put on that, so that's what we're going to talk about, that North Korea is only pretending to play nice with South Korea so that they can do something like a reunification, which will end up with North Korea in charge of South Korea. Personally, I see that risk as close to zero. There's nothing is zero, but that's pretty close to zero. And here's why. There are roughly twice as many South Koreans as North Koreans, and certainly any kind of reunification is going to be, a democratically inspired system. So South Korea is not going to vote North Korea into power when they have literally double the number of citizens. The South Koreans also have all of the money. So in any kind of a popularity contest, they're going to have persuasion, and once they open up communication and people in the North get to have news for the first time, there really isn't any chance that Kim Jong Un is going to be the leader of a unified North Korea. I don't want to say there's zero chance, but if that's what we're worrying about, that's a pretty good place to be. Imagine we went from worrying that North Korea could launch a nuclear weapon at me, in California, at me, and blow me up in a nuclear bomb, and it could happen, within days. That's what we were worrying about a few months ago. Today, I always say it's a legitimate conversation, but one of the things we're worried about is that 51 million South Koreans would lose out to 24 million North Koreans in a democratic process that would take a long time to work out, etc. I just don't see that as a risk, right? Now, I suppose it's possible you could make some kind of accidental weird mistake crafting your constitution that gave the North way more power than it should have for the size of its citizenship. I suppose. Is it possible? I mean, I can't even think of how you do that, but maybe. It would be something dumb like, giving one vote. Well, actually they could. If they came up with something like an electoral college that artificially gave North Korea, as much power as South Korea, I suppose that could happen. But I don't see them making that kind of a mistake. They aren't going to be united, silly talk. I am predicting that they will be united, but I have recommended what I call the 100-year plan, so that the current people will be dead before the hard decisions have to be made, and society will have, decades to just sort of get used to it and figure out how to make it work. But in the short term, they can have lots of communication and lots of cooperation that would be country-like without making the final decisions that are going to be hard. Iran says zero negotiations if we pull out. Yeah, so Iran is talking tough. I'm going to have to I have to confess that of all of the topics that are in the headlines, probably one that I understand the least is the Iran nuclear deal. So I feel like I need to bring myself up to speed on some of the key points of that to form an opinion, because I don't yet have an opinion whether the deal we have is a good one or a bad one. Now, I read the criticisms, and I understand that there are lots of smart people who say, oh my God, this deal is horrible, and I don't discount that. But I also haven't seen the reasons yet, or at least not consolidated in a place where I can see, the pro and the con and make my own decision. But I will tell you this, there's almost no chance that we can't improve on the deal. So if what Trump is saying is, 3/4 of a deal isn't good enough, we should take it to something that really could last and make a difference and really work, I would listen to that conversation, but I don't have an independent opinion yet. By the way, do most of you? I'd be curious. How many of you think the Iran deal is unambiguously bad? Give me your opinions. How many think the current Iran deal is let's say, so bad that we should walk away? I think all of you are going to say that. Now, I worry that this is, what we're seeing is just team sport behavior. Because I can't believe that most of you understand the Iran deal well enough to have an informed opinion. Some of you do, certainly. But how many of you, well, let me change the question now. Here's a new question. I'll wait for your answers to end so that they don't get confused with the last question. All right, so stop answering the question of whether you like the deal. All right, so no more answering the question about whether you like the Iran deal. Here's the next question. Do you feel that you personally understand the Iran deal, all of its ramifications, the ins and outs, well enough to have an informed opinion? How many of you believe you have an informed opinion about the Iran deal? Raise your hand if you have an informed opinion. There's a little delay here, so. All right. Yes or no? Do you have an informed opinion about the Iran nuclear deal? It got really quiet here, didn't it? Somebody's saying okay, nope, nope, nope. A couple of yeses. All right. So you saw what happened here, if you're watching the comments. When I said, do you think the Iran deal is a bad deal, it was close to 100% agreement that it was a bad deal. When I asked the same crowd, do you think you understand the Iran deal enough to really know if it's a good or bad deal, 75% of you said you don't understand it. So that's a pretty good indication that people have lined up by team, meaning that, somebody just said, I trust Trump, and if he says it's bad. And that's not unreasonable. So don't take any of this as a criticism. If your opinion is that the people you trust to know what a good deal looks like say it's not a good deal, and you just agree with the experts, that's not unreasonable. But I was just curious how many of you felt you independently understood the situation well enough. Personally, I am influenced by the fact that President Trump says it's a bad deal. But I would put this spin on it. He would say it's a bad deal even if he thought it was a pretty good deal that could be a little bit better. So when Trump says it's the worst deal in the world, you have to, mentally adjust it for hyperbole to say, okay, does that really mean it's just the worst deal in the world? Or does that mean it's got a few things he needs to fix, and saying it's the worst thing in the world and we're going to walk away from it is a way to fix those few things? Let's say wasn't it the long range missiles that are somewhat the issue? So you have to worry about how the experts are phrasing it, because they're trying to persuade. They're both trying to persuade Iran, and they're trying to persuade the public. So you're not really getting, nor should you get. Right? This is also not a criticism. If President Trump does not give you an objective, accurate impression of the Iran deal, that is not a problem. It's really not his job to inform us of the details, if doing so, to inform us accurately, if doing so is bad for the country. Right? It's America first, right? Make America great again. The president doesn't work for Iran. He works for America. So when he describes a problem, his description is not intended to be accurate. It is intended to get the best result for America. So if you trusted him that this deal is the worst thing you've ever seen, keep in mind, he wasn't really talking to you. He was talking to Iran, and he's negotiating. So it could be, and this is I'll say this is a preliminary opinion, which I could quite easily get moved from. My guess is that we've got a 75% good deal, and that the 25% we don't have is pretty important. And it would be completely reasonable, and in fact I would expect it, for people like Bolton and Trump to say, no, we're walking away, it's the worst deal in the world. We'd rather be in a nuclear confrontation than to accept this deal. So keep in mind that there's a positioning thing going on here that conceals some of the objective facts. I'll tell you one thing I would say for sure. If Iran, as a public government preference, is still saying, let's end Israel. So the way that Iran talks about Israel and what they're doing with Hamas and all the things that they're doing to bring trouble and or an end to Israel, if all those things are happening, then I would say there's no such thing as a good nuclear deal. If it leaves out anything. So the only deal with Iran that would be a good one in the context of them actively trying to, end Israel is, 100%. You gotta stop doing all of it. There's no such thing as, okay, you're 90% good, but only 10% you're trying to destroy Israel. That's no good. You can't leave 10% on the table of 10% trying to destroy a neighboring country with your long-range missiles or whatever you're doing. So you kind of have to go for 100% certainty on your deals of what you're not allowing because of the way they're talking. Now imagine if Iran had completely changed its government or its opinion on Israel and said, all right, we give up, Israel's there, we're going to recognize you and support you. Would you then be okay with the Iran deal? Let's say Iran stopped funding Hamas. That's not going to happen, but let's say Hezbollah. I'm sorry. Let's say they stopped funding Hezbollah. They stopped, being anti-Israel, and let's say Iran recognized Israel. Recognized their right to exist, did it publicly and officially. Would you then still have a problem with them having long-range missiles? Probably yes, because they might have problems with Saudi Arabia or somebody else, but you would certainly look at it differently. So I think as long as Iran is talking against Israel, there's no such thing as a deal that's good enough. There's no such thing as, well, it's pretty good. That just won't be a concept if they're still talking about destroying Israel. But remember, the golden age is when we realize that most of our problems are psychological. The problem with Iran and Israel is entirely psychological. And therefore, I believe that President Trump is maybe the first president who ever had at least a chance of making something good happen there. We've never had the right team in place. Now we do. We'll see what happens. Is there any other way to support me other than Patreon? Thanks for asking. By the way, my Patreon account got pretty active yesterday after the Kanye tweets. But I have books, Win Bigly, and if you would like to support me, which would be awesome, buying my books would be great. And if you are an investor in the ITO space, my startup WenHub has an active an offering of what we call Wen tokens. It's a crypto currency, and you can buy them right now at interface.wenhub.com. interface.wenhub.com, and you could buy the coins. That would actually be, if you wanted to know what would directly help me the most, it would be that, interface.wenhub.com. All right. I think that's it for now, and I will talk to all of you tomorrow, if not later today. We'll see how the news goes. Bye for now.